Hello, we are live. Welcome to Hope Resurrected Podcast. I'm your host, Lazarus Conley, and today I have my good buddy, good pal, Raphael David Beason. How are you today, my good sir?
I'm doing fairly well. I got a little bit of an ear infection going on, which is always
Ooh,
fun, but other than that, life is good.
yikes.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I cannot complain. So, I actually, what we should do right now is since nobody knows who you are, tell us about yourself. Because I can say I've been friends with you for almost a decade now. Um, we've gone on a trip we've gone from a trip where I picked you up from Louisiana to Houston, and we went on a bus with homeless people all the way to Michigan, all just to go to a monastery to visit your godson. Uh, So we've had some fun little trips, but tell us about yourself. Uh, I'm just going to refer you as David tonight. So,
That's fine. I mean that's my given name. The
or
Raphael
actually,
comes
I'll
from
do
the name of
Raphael
my
because
patron
we're
saint.
we're trying to be orthodox here.
Yeah, that name comes from my patron saint, Saint Raphael of Brooklyn. Um, I guess the story about my life can be a little convoluted. I don't know how much it's worth diving into. I guess a general summary for me would be that I'm a professional magician. I've written several articles that have been published in Orthodox magazines. Um, I've written like stories, poetry. I am a member of the Center for Inquiry's Skeptical Investigations group. Yeah, it's
That's pretty cool stuff, honestly. Like the magician stuff. You've gotten into that a whole lot, and you've gotten pretty good at it, actually. Um, yeah, and so we're gonna go into this because you wrote some articles years ago, but uh, one of them was your journey to orthodoxy, and let me just see if I can pull it up here real quick. So I'm just gonna go. Here we go. So you can find this on. I'll actually link to it later. It's on Blogspot, but I'll link it later. Um, on your journey to orthodoxy, you tell us about you grew up with your grandparent, your grandmother, and I met her. She was a really nice lady. Um, but what else you got here? So you started out like almost kind of Southern Baptist. You went Pentecostal holiness. You did have your faith shaken because you were reading Bart Ehrman, and then you went Islam for a while. You were a Darwinist for a good portion of it afterwards, and then you were a secularist, a militant atheist,
yeah. I,
and
I don't know if I would parse out uh Darwinism. I think the term Darwinist. I don't even know if there really are any Darwinists left. I would say that that's probably grouped in more with being an atheist, not grouped in, but just being an atheist and having
right,
some pretty hardcore doubts there. The Southern Baptist thing, I think my grandmother would say that she's Southern Baptist. I don't know if there's really much in the way of denominational understanding at that
right.
stage of my life. We went to a Baptist church. When we went to church, it wasn't all that often.
Might have been like maybe like default, like say when I was in the UCC, somebody would ask, I'd be like, "Well, I go to the United Church of Christ." You know, if somebody had ever asked, I guess that would kind of be how you kind of maybe would have answered if they had asked you.
Yeah, and my grandmother to this day will tell you she's a Baptist. So
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you've got such an interesting story because like you've been in Islam for a while, um, and you've been an atheist, you've been through all these paths, but then you became an Orthodox Christian.
yeah, so the logic. in that journey, I think if I lay it out, won't seem as bizarre as maybe when you hear it. So, as a child, life was pretty chaotic. I dealt with a lot of violence, a lot of instability. Um, so moving in with my grandparents, my grandfather unfortunately died when I was fairly young. I think I was about 12, 13 years old. Um, Church wasn't a really big thing. Um, my grandmother, like I said, I think she would always consider herself religious, and I think a lot of people in the U.S. consider themselves religious, and I'm sure we all know people who call themselves Christians, but they're not really active.
Yeah.
Um, so I was never really that deep into the church, but I just had those epistemological assumptions about the world that the Bible's the word of God, it's inerrant, it's 100% true. Um, so when I finally started going to church fairly regularly, it was with the in the Church of God in Christ, which is in the Pentecostal holiness movement, but it was different in that they had a Trinitarian belief.
Right.
So that's interesting in and of itself. And I made a lot of friends there. It was a really important part of my life. It helped with a lot of like healing, um, just being very broken and bitter and angry at the world, and kind of understanding this idea of forgiveness. Um, which to this day plays a real radical part in my life. This idea of radical redemption
Oh yeah.
that Christ represents. Um, but again, in the holiness movement, there's not a lot of emphasis on theology.
Right.
So when people start asking you questions, I wasn't really prepared with any kind of like ammunition to respond to things. The first time I dealt with this was with a guy. He was quite a bit older than me, who was in the I think the Church of Christ. Now the Church of Christ is a very stripped down version of Christianity. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Church of Christ at all,
I
are you?
am. Yeah, my grandma's actually Church of Christ.
Yeah, they don't have music in the church
Oh yeah.
because the disciples didn't have music. They try they have a really uh, faux orthodox mindset. It's if it's not in the New Testament church, what they perceive as the New Testament church, they're not doing it. Um, and he had a lot of really poignant questions that I didn't have responses to. Um, I had friends who were Sabbath Day Adventist, and again, I didn't know anything about church history. I knew nothing about science. I don't ever think I even read the Bible. So when someone's showing you passages where it's very specific, like the Sabbath is forever, um, them asking you questions like, yeah, where in the Bible does it say that the Sabbath changed? The Ten Commandments,
Right.
everybody agrees you got to keep the Ten Commandments. Where in the Bible does it say the Sabbath changed? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't say it anywhere. Um, and stepping back to not want, being really enthralled in the Church of God in Christ, my response was to buy the book that they had on theology.
Right.
And their response was, well, the Catholics worship on Sunday, we worship on Sunday, which isn't a great answer to give to somebody who's a Sabbath Day Adventist, whose whole like belief system rotates around this giant conspiracy that Rome essentially corrupted the church, and that Peter warns of two Christ, that the Catholic Christ, the Protestant Christ, is not the same as the Adventist Christ. Now, of course, later on, being Orthodox, learning history, knowing that, like St. Athanasius actually talks about the importance of Sunday worship, the disciples meeting early on Sunday. This was very, very early in the Christian church. Um, And in fact, the top Sabbath day Adventist scholar makes no bones about this. He admits this as being true. Um, the general argument that they made is that Constantine changed it. And this goes
Right.
along with the that they had that the time will be changed and the law will be changed. And that's what they say Constantine did. He changed it from uh, sun up to sundown being a day to a 24-hour day. He changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, which was supposed to be worship of the sun god. All this was hard to deal with as a young person. Again, not having any church history, not having any real foundation in theology. And then Bart Ehrman hit like a ton of
Right.
bricks. Ehrman is a world-class scholar. There's no denying that. His work is solid. It's on point. He's not lying. He's just not always giving you the whole truth. So when he says that there are more, so he'll say a statement like there are more textual errors than there are words in the Bible. That's true. But what is a textual error, right? It could be something as simple as a scribe writing down an E instead of an A. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Now some of it is. Some of it is.
Right.
But
Right.
the general impression that he leaves you with just watching one of these pop lectures that he does is that the Bible's completely useless. None of what's written we can trust, and we have no idea what Jesus said. Which, when he was actually pressed by the infidel guy on his radio program, the infidel guy being a famous atheist, he's since retired and he's a scientist now. Asked him, "Well, what does the Bible say?" And Ehrman goes, "Well, what did Jesus say?" Well, what do you mean? What's in the Bible? That's what he said.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I mean, so you went through like this period before Orthodoxy where you did go like you were a militant atheist, but then over time the resurrection of Christ is what compelled you into, going that route, right?
Yeah. So, there's. I have to say that by nature, I tend to be a fairly skeptical person, and I think considering my background, I don't think it should be all that shocking when you grow up around authority figures and all your authority figures are just sociopaths. You
Right.
you don't have a great sense of trust. You're kind of trying to figure out things on your own. So I think either via nature or nurture, or maybe a combination of the two, I tend to be a fairly skeptical person. I don't just believe things for the sake of believing them for the most part. I mean, I'm sure there are things that I believe now that are wrong that I'm just assuming that I haven't really thought about. But yeah, I was pretty sold on the idea that God didn't exist. Now, after the Bart Ehrman thing, I started to read a lot. I got really, really into reading. I read a lot of science books. I started reading a lot of philosophy books. And during this transition of deconverting from Christianity, I really didn't want to give up the idea of God and the idea that
Right.
there's one God. Hence, where Islam comes into play, because
Mhm.
um, it's claiming to be an Abrahamic religion, it's claiming to be a continuation, and it's claiming that it has science. And you can find videos online where the Saudis paid quite a bit of money to have scientists come and talk about how there's verses in the Quran and that there's no way that Muhammad could have known it apart from divine revelation. Now, since this has happened, there's a few things have taken place. One, the information was just wrong. So you have I can't remember the guy's name right now. It's not really relevant, but he was a really big embryologist, and he talked about embryology in the Quran and the way the Quran describes it. It's just not right. Um,
Right.
they claim that the Big Bang is in the Quran, that the heavens and earth were together, God tore them asunder, just stuff like this. At the time, I found appealing. Um, so leaving Christianity, being very skeptical of religion, leaning more towards looking towards science and things like this to kind of strengthen my faith, kind of like that outside proof. Um, Islam seemed attractive, but going into it, already kind of having a much more skeptical mindset, it was very hard for me to just accept what they said about things, right? So the
Right.
Quran makes claims like semen exceeds from between the backbone and ribs.
Right.
I don't know about you, but my semen doesn't exceed from between my backbone and ribs.
True.
It talks about there's a hadith. Now, hadith generally you would say that this is just sayings of the prophet. This isn't something that is weighed very heavily. However, this specific hadith starts off with the prophet of God said. This puts it on kind of a higher standard. So the conversation is between these two people. They're talking about where the sun goes. It says, oh, the prophet of God says that the sun goes across the sky. It sets beneath the throne of God. It asks for permission and it rises up again, where the throne of God is the earth. So it's prostrating beneath the earth, asking for permission and rising up again. This is obviously the Quran describing the earth as the center of the universe and the sun rotating around the earth. Make statements like the sun sets in a pool of water. But the biggest one, the biggest issue was surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus. Um, Even the most liberal of scholars, like John Dominic Crossing, will say that this is the most well-established fact in history.
Right.
I quote in that article, I believe it was R.J. Huffman, he's an atheist, but he's a Bible scholar, he's a historian, who compares mythicists to flat earthers. So essentially, when
Yeah.
someone tells you that Jesus never existed or he was never crucified, it's akin to someone walking up to you and telling you that an alien probed their anus, right? Like,
Yeah. It's true. No, you're right though. It really is.
yeah. So given those things, it was that was kind of a rotating glass door scenario.
Yeah, like cuz in your article I'm referencing another article that you wrote, why I believe the resurrection. I'm trying to pull it up. You talk about, like, you kind of read like Lee Strobel, which he's pretty good for a lot of stuff. Not on everything, but he's got some interesting stuff that he's got. And like you put on here, like Jesus' empty tomb, the appearances of him after his death and resurrection, the origin of the disciples' beliefs in resurrection. And you've got like here, like about Dr. Habermas records 1,400 scholars, both skeptics and non-skeptics alike, that make up that 75% of the scholars do accept like this, this happened or whatever. Um,
Yeah, and I actually think that number has gone up.
Saint actually. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say, I think that number's actually gone up. So essentially, what he's doing here is he's pulling people who have expertise in the field and seeing about where they come down on these different ideas.
Right.
Um, and the reason why I think this is good to start, because you take somebody like Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman's not going to deny that Jesus was crucified.
Right.
He's not going to argue. I think he's not going to argue that the disciples had an experience of Christ after the crucifixion. Now, Ehrman, in a debate with William Lane Craig, posited a theory, got spanked, and has since then refused to posit any alternative explanations for the disciples' belief or what could have happened. Um, which is interesting. I mean, generally in a debate, you would hope that someone would try to provide another hypothesis, but I think for the most part they've kind of moved away from that. I think Richard Carrier is still trying to posit some grand hallucination theory.
Oh
the
yeah,
issue the issue is that, in psychology, you're not going to get people who all have the same hallucination.
exactly.
But I think he tries to argue that this was a special case, that all of these people were mentally ill. They kind of suffered from the same kind of delusions. But again, I don't think Carrier, I don't think we should really look at him as much of a serious scholar. Not that I don't think he does all bad work, but I mean, he's a mythicist. He's got some pretty weird ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I can see like somebody trying to argue like, oh well, they saw Jesus of Nazareth, the historical Jesus, as a like, oh, they felt so strongly that he was the Messiah, and then oh, this all didn't pan out like we hoped, but we're hallucinating this anyways. But when I hear that argument, I usually think about Simon the Star, because the same thing happened where he declared himself a Messiah, and he gets killed, and like Rome kills him, and the same thing just does not happen, and people believe so strongly in him, the Jews did, that, well, they went to war for him, they believed so hard that he was the Messiah that they did this. So, I just don't, I don't, I don't know that I don't know that this argument that I'm giving is a great argument, but it's like, this is just my personal thoughts, is that, I usually think like, oh, well, if they were this strong and it was a delusion, like, why didn't it work for that, So
Yeah.
anyways,
Well, so I don't want to be the type of person who downplays people's skepticism. I
right.
do think that people can give you good reasons for why they're not a Christian, why they don't believe this. I'm sure, like, there's a lot of different reasons.
Oh yeah.
Um, N.T. Wright wrote a book about Paul that I found really compelling, and he paints a picture of Paul as a zealot. Now,
Mhm.
this is a very specific word, the word zealot, because this was a group of people who believed that violence was the answer, that killing a Christian was a way to break this curse.
Right.
And this idea goes back to an event that was happening with the Israelites. The Israelites are cursed. Moses is kind of, I think, well, maybe it was Abraham. Abraham is old. He's not really functioning all that great. There's a guy having sex in a tent with a woman who's not Jewish. The guy walks into the tent, kills the guy, curse breaks.
Right.
Um, so what's the relevance of me bringing this up? So I think that if we look at the events following the crucifixion, the life of the disciples were in disarray.
Oh yeah.
Why? Well, they had fallen for a false prophet. They just saw the guy that they thought was the Messiah get killed. Not only was he killed, he's nailed to a cross. The Torah says that anybody nailed to a cross is cursed.
Right.
Not that long ago, this guy's telling him to eat his flesh and drink his blood.
Yeah.
Again, this stuff is heretical to a Jew. These are all things that the Torah is forbidding you to do. And you're going along with it because you really believe this guy, and all of a sudden he's dead.
Right.
So what happens between being really amped up that this guy's the Messiah, him dying, the disciples all running and hiding, to now I'm ready to die for this idea? That's that's the part that skeptics really have to come to terms with and really hammer out. Because to me, it seems like the best explanation is the resurrection.
Yeah, I would think so too.
Now, I'm not sure if it's in this article or not, but I reference a debate that Michael Lacona, who's a historian, had with an atheist. And essentially, during the debate, the guy admits that the evidence is great, but that the resurrection didn't happen because God doesn't exist and he doesn't believe and therefore the resurrection couldn't take place. I don't know if this is a great way to build your epistemology.
Yeah, I don't know that it is either.
So, um, and this struck me. This struck me not too long ago, actually. Alvin Plantinga. He's a Christian philosopher. He's widely regarded as the man who resurrected the God debate with his book, God and Other Minds. He posits
Mhm.
this idea of reformed epistemology in which he says it's rational to believe that God exists apart from any evidence, and it's a belief that everyone's always held. It's been held across cultures. It's no more irrational than believing there's an other mind other than mine. Maybe you buy this, maybe you don't, but I think in light of like a book like The Resurrection of Theism, where I'm going through and I'm reading these arguments, and they all seem really good. But if my epistemological foundation is atheism, and my only rebuttal to solid evidence is, well, God doesn't exist, therefore it isn't true or can't be
Yeah.
true, seems kind of
It's
shaky.
it's just kind of like what they argue that the theist will argue that, oh, well, I believe in God, so therefore it's true. You know, I mean, it's basically that argument, except just reversed. Seems like.
Yeah, and I don't know. To me, it seems like if you're weighing out the evidence and the best explanation is God versus no God, you go with God. And I would say the same thing, right? Like, I'm a member of the Skeptic Society.
Right.
There's a lot of fake miracles out there. Um, I my initial reaction is, where's the beef? I need to see something a little bit more than a picture of a weeping icon to assume that the icon's actually weeping.
Right. Yeah, and I just when I'm reading your article, I think of that too. Like, there's so many things in the Gospels that it the person reading them at the time in Rome, a Second Temple Jew, a Roman soldier, whatever, they're gonna read this and be like, this is so silly. Like, they're using freaking women, and this is their mindset at the time. They're using freaking women as their witnesses. Like, really? you know?
Yeah, and the tour is fairly clear about its weighing of a woman's testimony. It's not
Oh
great.
yeah.
And that's actually something that historians consider when they're looking at documentation. It's um, the embarrassment criteria.
Right.
So the idea that women who weren't considered like trustworthy would be the people who would present this evidence isn't something people are likely to make up because it's
Right.
embarrassing.
Well, yeah, it's I think of like little, there's these bits in the Bible where you can argue about editing and whatnot, but like, you get parts in there like Matthew talking about how he was a tax collector, where it's like, okay, that's a strike against you already to the Jews because they don't like you guys helping Rome. Uh, and now you're helping this Messiah character that we also don't like, at least the Pharisees and the some of the Essenes, but and definitely the Sadducees. But then you get like Mark, where you know he may be the kid that gets referenced where he got caught butt naked run like he lost his robe while he was running away. You get like a reference to that maybe, and then you just get like Luke is like the only one that's probably not embarrassed by anything that he's writing, but then you read John, and John says some very embarrassing things about him and Peter, that like we did this and we were like so stupid. Like he straight up says like Jesus revealed all this to me because he's essentially saying because I was stupid until Jesus enlightened me, you know. And just it's things like that you just think to yourself like, they're reading, like you read Acts and other pieces like that, and Paul also, he had this high place where he could have been a student of Gamaliel and just kept doing that, and he would have been doing great as a Second Temple Jew. But instead, all these people decide, because they have these experiences and they truly believe that they've witnessed the resurrected Christ, they're that's the that's the evidence that they have. And then you have the church fathers, and those also, at least in my opinion, like Saint Irenaeus and other saints like Saint Justin, where they actually knew John. They knew John and they knew John's disciples, and because they're all centered around Ephesus. Um, stuff like that. Just, to me, that presents really good evidence. Like, and maybe somebody doesn't believe it, but I tend to also, when I take all this evidence, put it into account, I look at some of the secular sources that we have, like Josephus, Jewish sources, Second Temple sources, and I tend to believe like, okay, this guy, I think he was the Messiah. I think.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is like I would caution against leaning heavily on Josephus, at least in
Oh yeah,
conversations
no doubt.
with people who are skeptical, who have like doubts and everything, because Josephus was definitely edited.
Oh
Um,
yes, I
Large
agree with you
portion of
there.
it
I
at a
agree with you
minimum
there.
was forgery. So
Well, and Josephus also, I always like to tell the full preterist this. Josephus declares, after all this stuff that he's seen, that Vespasian, the Caesar, is Messiah. So, you know, like
yeah,
I don't know that that's the best, and like, yeah, I don't know if that's the best source that we need, but I do. The reason I said that was because he references John the Baptist and he references Saint James. So, you know,
yeah,
give or take, there is some stuff that he is helpful for, even though it's heavily
yeah.
edited.
Well,
But
at least what he says about Jesus being the Son of God, stuff like this, that's widely considered a forgery. I'm sure he makes other references, but Josephus isn't the only source
right,
from that time
agreed.
that's secular that makes references to Christ. So
Oh yeah. Um. So now we've covered those two things. I guess we can talk about young Earth creationism, which is one of your favorite topics.
I don't know if it's one of my one of my favorite topics.
I'm joke. I was kind of joking there.
I've definitely talked about it quite a bit. I've been on other podcasts talking about it. Um, I don't know how versed I am in young Earth creationism per se, as far as like what they believe. I know the history of it in this country has been really weird. It was really influenced by Ellen White. Ellen White being the founder of like the Seventh Day Adventist. Um,
Oh yeah.
Plagiarized massive amounts of her work. I don't know. Um, yeah, sure. Shoot away. Like let's dive into it.
All right. Why are you not a younger creationist? I guess I should ask first.
Well, it's not true.
Okay.
Is the biggest issue that I have.
So yeah, I don't know how to word these. I'm just a silly podcaster trying to get better at talking and stuff. But
So I'll throw you a better bone here.
all right.
The issue I have is that the evidence just isn't there.
Right.
Um, I don't fault people for holding the view. I don't think it's I got to be careful how I say this. I would say if you haven't had a science education, if you
It'd be
haven't
hard. Yeah.
had like most of our like the orthodox dogmatic theology, like going through our school, you're gonna be exposed to like the science on this stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
I would be surprised. I know like Patriarch Kirill has been very open that he believes in evolution. um Human evolution, for those who are going to try to parse that out, he absolutely believes that. um Patriarch Bartholomew is a huge supporter of CERN. Um, there's plenty of articles written that you can find on Orthodox Bio. There's been statements released by the church in several different ways, affirming that theistic evolution is compatible with Orthodoxy. But more than anything, for me, there's just solid evidence for evolutionary biology. The one that comes to mind fairly quickly is the human chromosome fusion site 2. Um, I'm a little murky on the details off the top of my head, but essentially, we have two less, I believe, two less chromosomes than the great apes have.
Right.
If we share a common ancestry with them, this wouldn't take place. They just can't be gone. So we would have to find a fusion of these two chromosomes, and we found it. We know exactly where it is. The only explanation for this could be that God just designed it like that.
Hmm.
Um, which makes me feel really cynical. And I think of a Bill Hicks joke where he talks about God being a trickster God who's just throwing stuff out there to mess with us. I don't that idea is more scary to me than anything, that God's just putting dinosaur bones on the earth and making it look 4.5
Right.
billion years old, just so when we get to heaven, St. Peter can ask us if we believe in flying lizards and then throw us into hell. And that's more of a stretch to me than anything.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, like I'm not a young Earth creationist either, by the way. But for anybody wondering, but I'm not, for a different reason. So theologically and historically, when the ancients read Genesis, like the Jews read Genesis, they didn't think of it in this way, like, oh, let's read it like a science textbook.
Yeah.
Like this only happened because the modernist Bible critics decided that they wanted to try to discredit the Bible. So of course you start at the Pentateuch and you try to go like, well, Moses obviously didn't write this because y'all say he did, but y'all's tradition says that he did, but we can see like it's clear in like Joshua and not Joshua, Deuteronomy, like it talks about Moses dying and his death and he was buried here. How did Moses write that, huh? You know, and you're like, okay, well, they didn't believe that they believed this very loosely that Moses traditionally wrote the, you know, wrote this and that somebody added to it that part, obviously. And over time, the scribes, the scribes, did it back and forth. And eventually the Old Testament that we got today is basically from Ezra because he restored the Torah, and that's why when you read Genesis, you have like these instances where it's like Abraham went to the land of Dan, and it's like, okay, that makes no, like if you're reading it from uh if you're reading it from a literal, like literist, whatever, you're gonna go like, okay, why is he in like the land of Dan? Abraham's grandson isn't even born yet, you know, because
Yeah.
yeah, so
Well,
you have to
and
come in, you have to interpret it, you know, like this is obviously like Ezra wrote this so that because nobody knows that that was the land of Luesh. It's the land of Dan to them when they're reading it at the time. So uh, but anyways, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
well, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Robert Ingersoll. Robert Ingersoll was a writer. He was an orator. He was
Mm-hmm.
really influential in politics. He was known as the Great Agnostic, and he wrote this book called "Some Mistakes of Moses." So, "Some Mistakes of Moses" is a really interesting book because the criticisms are seemingly valid criticisms. He talks about things like how a priest has to eat, I believe it's a dove for every child who's born. And essentially, Ingersoll makes the point that, if this is literal, if this is going on, these priests had to just be eating doves all the time.
Yeah.
Um, it- but again, it's only if you take this as literal. Like if we look at some of these things and say it has to be exactly like this, we run into problems. I think another example is like circumcision. Bible doesn't tell you what to circumcise,
Right.
right? So
Yeah.
obviously there's some stuff that we have to look outside of the Bible to understand. There's tradition, there's things like that. So
Yeah. It's and I'm not trying to diss my Protestant friends that come on here, but that's part of like where sola scriptura I feel like falls apart in some instances because you have to use and they do use tradition sometimes. They'll say that when they say that, but like sometimes there's things that are just not there and you have to kind of take the history and the tradition and put that all together also.
yeah, and in fairness, like and there's I can't I'm probably gonna get the name wrong, but I think it's called the new atheist bully, something along this line.
Right.
And the author of the book goes to great extent to talk about the birth of different branches of science, and practically everyone was founded by a believer. Big Bang cosmology was founded by a priest.
Right.
The father of modern evolutionary biology was Theodosus Dubinsky, who was Orthodox.
Yeah.
His father was a priest.
Hmm.
He grew up Orthodox. Um, the person who sequenced the human genome, the head of that project, is Francis Collins. Francis Collins is a very active scientist. He's an evangelical Christian. The person who writes or takes part in writing most of the books on evolutionary biology right now is Kenneth Miller. Kenneth Miller is a Catholic. So, I mean, if you actually delve into this beyond like Richard Dawkins, right? Like some of these people who are just really loud and boisterous, you'll find that there's a large and rich tradition of Christians who are involved in the sciences, who've helped found the sciences, who are some of the leading figures in moving it forward. So I don't believe this is something that we have to be afraid of. And it goes with the Protestants too. I mean, the Protestants are currently doing a lot of actually great science, so they're not really tied to that either.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I'm not a younger creationist, and it's simply like I believe the science is pretty good. It's the best I always say like it's the best explanation for the natural like explanations of stuff. But as Genesis goes theologically and stuff, like you know if you look at Second Temple literature, like if you go read like Jubilees, for example, it literally says that Moses received a vision in a prophetic sense up on Mount Sinai from God. And that's what he was given when he was given like the Genesis. So, when you read Genesis, it's obviously not a scientific textbook. God was trying to give him basically like what he gave Daniel. Um, he gave him visions, and he gave him a vision uh, so that he could use that for his prophetic role as God's person, you know. Um, so you know, I just I don't interpret Genesis that way because Second Temple period doesn't, and so Jesus probably doesn't either. You know, Jesus probably doesn't interpret it that way because if Jesus is God, he gave that to Moses and he gave it in a prophetic sense. So, um, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I haven't personally delved too deep in that aspect of it. Um, there's a there's a Jewish guy I really like. He's a physicist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's Jared. I can't remember his name right now either. But he talks about like Genesis quite a bit about how like the term Adam was not a first name; it was a surname. So there's some stuff that, to begin with, our understanding probably isn't very correct. That it was Adams, not Adam. Um, I think we have to like recognize that there's two different creation stories. That the creation story itself, I think, goes along with some of what the Babylonians believed. Um, Archbishop Lazar Hobla has a really interesting idea about this. He says, like, when we look at it, it seems more like a refutation of pagan belief. So
I
instead
think
of
so
God
too.
being the sun, God makes the sun. And
Yeah,
there's really interesting things in it. Like there's light before the creation of the sun. So we have really interesting things in there that don't make sense in a literal if we take it literally.
I think that's a good way to put it because you know you read Babylonian texts and they've got like oh the this is made by the sun god, this is made by this god, and in Genesis it's like well no Yahweh is the god of all these gods, all these gods that we believe are fallen angels, you know. Um, so yeah, I mean there's I just don't think that you can interpret the Bible in this modernist way like Ellen G. White wanted to do it. You know, I agree with you on that for sure, you know. And science has like some of the best stuff. Maybe stuff will change when you know, when we keep going, you know, trying to learn stuff, but I mean,
And it will it
yeah,
will but the thing is it's like it's going to change in really small areas. I mean,
yeah,
so
exactly.
just briefly, like the word theory is a dirty word amongst like young Earth
True.
creationists, but the reality is like a theory is somewhat of a summary of like a bunch of facts, right? So there's the theory of gravity, like gravity's real. But there's a lot of details within our understanding of gravity that may change over time. It's the same
Right.
thing with evolutionary biology. We're dealing with things like Evo, Devo, natural selection, sexual selection, a lot of genetic things. So some of the understanding may tweak over time, but the general theory itself is not going anywhere. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's 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 so solid. Just the genetic information alone. I mean, we sequenced the human genome, and we can literally look at it and see the spaces where we deviate genetically from chimps. So we share, I think it's what about 99.6% of our DNA with.
Yeah, I generally yeah, I agree with you on that. I generally think that young Earth creationism is basically just a modernist way of Bible interpretation. And I also think, you know,
I mean, so
I don't hold anything against anybody for believing it either, but um yeah, go ahead.
so and again, like I want to be fair. Like there were definitely church fathers and early Christians who took these stories literally, and
Oh
there
yeah.
are others who did not. Origin didn't.
Mhm.
Again, Origin, kind of a buzz. We call him a
Yeah.
buzzword, buzz name, whatever. People are going to go off the rails about that. But he's one of the most influential Christian writers ever. He influenced Chrysostom and all of these guys. Um, he didn't take it literally. Augustine didn't take it literally. But then on the other side, you will have others who did.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And none of them were seen as, none of them were seen as like heresy, that none of them were seen as that.
Well, because I don't believe that they understood it as a oh, to use
But
like a
yeah,
Protestant term, a salvation issue, right? This isn't
yeah,
something
exactly.
that's going to put you outside of the grace of the church.
Right, exactly. And I tend to agree. Like when we read Genesis, we should try and approach it in a way that, like what point is the author trying? Like if it's a vision, like I'm saying it, I think it is. If it's like a vision, at least Genesis 1 through 11 for sure. Um, if it's a vision, what is this vision trying to, portray? What is it trying to explain to us? What is it trying to communicate with us? What is God trying to communicate through this vision? Just like when you have to interpret Daniel, what is this little horn? What is this? What is this beast? What are these four beasts that are coming out of the Mediterranean?
And
Just yeah,
and I'm not a scriptural inerrantist anyway, so I have no problem thinking that there's stuff that in it that's just wrong. I'm not beyond that either. I think the census that they talk about in the Bible seems to most likely not have happened. There's no like records of it taking place. You'll get some apologists that really stretch and reach for that, but I think it's also something that's only referenced in maybe one gospel.
yeah. I mean, I tend to believe it probably did, but I also, hey, I could be wrong. So, you know, I just kind of hold that. But yeah, yeah. So I don't know what I'm trying to say here. So I do have a question though. So how do you think critically think? How do you think critically thinking would be beneficial to everybody that is a Christian?
Yeah, so I I think it's always important to have a healthy dose of skepticism about things. And I'll give you an example. Christ on the Hills Monastery. It was founded in Blanco, Texas. They had a supposedly miracle working icon. They used this supposedly miracle working icon to fund essentially a pedophile operation. The man who founded
Right,
it was a giant real estate guy. He found a way not to pay taxes. They abused like I don't know how many people. The guy ended up killing himself, and I think a little bit of skepticism around something like that could have gone a long ways, right? Like just because
absolutely,
this guy says he has a miracle working icon that they found a monastery in Texas, we shouldn't all just flock to support it.
exactly. I agree with you.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple other examples. There was a priest out in California. The Seraphim Roses publication, the publication that came out of St. Herman's Hermitage. Do you know the name of that magazine?
Oh, I used to.
Yeah, I can't remember right now either, but this priest was killed in California. I'm not going to mention his name, but the article that they came out with was that he was killed by Satanists and that
Right,
they committed suicide by drinking poison, and they put 666 on the wall, and it was completely made up. The people weren't Satanists; they were members of the church. They didn't commit suicide. The guy they've tried to make this particular priest into a saint, but if you look at the court cases, there were women who were very strong believers who left the church because she claimed that he sexually assaulted her.
right.
There were other claims like that, and you have this monastery who makes up a story about this guy, and they're ready to turn him into a saint, and he seems to be completely the opposite. And this is easily documented that this stuff didn't take place. So, but if we just went by this magazine, we didn't do any thinking about it, we would all believe that this guy was murdered by Satanists and that he was this
Right.
incredibly wonderful man without any hint that he's done any wrong to anyone.
Yeah, and there's such a danger to that, because if they did say, if they did make him a saint, you know, what happens when, a child or even just an adult, they you want your faith to be credible on a lot of things. Like, you want to be able to say, like, we do, like, vet this, like, we do make sure that the saints are saints, um and, like, what happens when you've got this saint, or you've made this person a saint, and they're actually just a freaking devil, like, that's got to destroy somebody's faith sometimes, even if it's in, like, a small bit, that's something that I would, you know I
Yeah,
would think would.
and even beyond that, like we can move beyond religion to, like, let's say, like,
Right, right.
homeopathy, right? Like, homeopathy is a type of medicine that has literally no active ingredients. The theory behind it is that if you can't go to sleep, that you need caffeine, but you need such a low dose of caffeine that there's literally no caffeine in it. Uh, this is something that people spend amazing amounts of money on, and there's zero proof that it works.
Right.
Um, Dowsing. The military spend a bunch of money on essentially dowsing rods to find bombs. Dowsing rods don't work. There was a man named James Randi. He passed away. He offered $1 million challenge to people who could prove um, stuff like this. The dowser showed up, fell. Psychics. As a magician, I'm aware of this technique called cold reading. Cold reading is where I just throw out a bunch of questions. Um, Something hits, or I feel like it hits, and I just kind of keep delving into it. The way that our brains work, we're not very good at statistics. We actually discovered calculus before we discovered statistics.
Right.
Right? Um, our human brain is just, we're not great with statistics, and odds are that you are going to remember the hits and forget the misses. I watched a psychic give a family a reading. The family had showed up, they were in tears, they were talking about how they wanted to contact their dead daughter who died in a car crash. Later on, the woman goes, "Oh, I've contacted your dead daughter who died in a car crash."
Hmm.
Afterwards, they're bawling their eyes out. How could she have known this? I don't know. Could it be that you mentioned earlier in the day that you wanted to contact your daughter who died in a car crash? But they don't remember that part. They remember the really emotional connection that they had right then. Um, essentially,
I've seen charismatics do it too. Like, I've watched
oh yeah,
charismatics. They do it, like, I don't know if it's Hillsong or it's Bethel Church. I know they do this all the time. They do cold readings, and I'm like, what's the difference? I asked somebody. I was like, what's the difference between you and a psychic? Like, what's the difference
there's
between you and that fake psychic? And they're like, well, I've got the Holy Spirit. I'm like, they say they've got the Spirit
yeah,
too. I'm like, but what all you're doing is literally just look, and they tell you straight up. They're like, well, first, when I do this, I ask a question, and all they're doing is an internal monologue with themselves and going, they actually delude themselves into believing that they are actually doing a cold read, like, but they're
yeah.
actually just doing
So
a cold reading.
and we have a term for that. It's like it's closed eye, right? It's someone
Yeah.
who's kind of picked up these techniques without really realizing what they're doing. Now, early on, there were quite a bit of faith healers who were flat out using techniques. They were
Oh yeah.
doing things like leg lengthening. Um, Again, this is an old magic parlor trick. Peter Popoff, who was exposed on national TV, he was wearing an earpiece. He would walk out into the crowd. He would say God was talking to him, and his wife would be in the back reading off the cards
Oh
about the
yeah.
people, saying not so great things about them, making tons of money. Um, the wheelchair gimmick was a really big one. Uh, this was not popularized. Well, I mean, it might have been popularized by Popoff, but it wasn't originated with Popoff. People would come in, they would be unsteady. They would offer them a chair, a wheelchair. They would wheel them to the front. They would walk up. This is a technique called instant stooging. You would go, "Hey, is that your chair?" Now, Lazarus, if you're at a restaurant, someone walks up to you and go, "Oh, is this your chair?" What are you going to say?
Yes, this is my chair.
Yeah, but you didn't bring it from home, right? It's not your chair.
Right.
Which is why we call it instant stooging, because the person is being honest, but everybody else is perceiving it as it's literally their wheelchair. So you
Oh
walk
yeah.
up to this person that you put in a wheelchair, you ask them, "Is this your chair?" They say yes. You say, "God's going to heal you. Stand up." They stand up. They go, "Hey, grab the wheelchair, run around." Again, most of these people could walk; they were just unsteady. The wheelchair turned into a walker. Now they can actually move pretty briskly, and to the audience overall, it seems like this person who was in a wheelchair who couldn't walk is now running around. And so you'll see several things like this go on in the faith healing movement. Psychic surgery is another one. Psychic surgery was a big thing that was done in the
Yeah.
Philippines. Um, it was protected as the idea that it was a religious movement. I know exactly how it's done. I'm not going to get into it because of the whole magic exposure thing, but it's actually fairly simple to do. It involves a lot of times chicken blood that they're pouring on people that they think it's actually their blood. Um, Briefly, for people who don't know what I'm talking about, psychic surgery was essentially this idea that a psychic could perform a surgery on you without tools, just using their mind. Um, they've actually been able to analyze some of the blood, and it was like cow's blood, chicken blood, stuff like that. But the person getting the psychic surgery doesn't realize that. And people would spend like $10,000 to get this done. So there's a lot of reasons why we should approach these things with skepticism, and that's a few of them. We should always be
Yeah.
critical and
Like at least for orthodoxy, I really feel like um so many people would benefit from critical thinking and just get learning science in general because like right now you and me see it all the time. You have all these people that they believe conspiracies galore. Like I used to love conspiracies back in the day. I used to love that stuff, right? Now that it's become mainstream, I'm like this is so sad. Like this is so bad that it's become this.
yeah.
Um but this is what like years of not teaching people science has done to us, or not even that, but like not even teaching in general. Like just uneducated masses just that it makes for like really bad thinking. So
It's pretty amazing. It's Michael Shermer has a quote where it's why do people believe conspiracies? Well, because some conspiracies are true. The greatest conspiracy started World War II, the Black
right.
Hand. They wanted to destroy the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they were able to do it. But then you get something like Pizzagate.
Yeah.
Hey, there's sex trafficking children in a basement that doesn't exist, right? Like
Yeah.
so some conspiracies are true. That's the issue. And it's being able to discern which ones are far-fetched and which ones aren't, right? Like in generally, the more people who have to be involved in a conspiracy, the less likely it is to be true.
Right.
Um, take something like flat earth, like the flat earth conspiracy. You have to think about like how many people would be involved in making this happen. It would have to be every nation, every science, every space exploration from Russia, NASA. And when you consider that Bill Clinton wasn't able to get a sexual act performed on him in the White House without everybody figuring out, it seems pretty unlikely that they would be able to pull off a conspiracy that grand.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I think of when you give those examples, I think of like anti-vaxxers. Like that is the most dangerous one I can think of at the moment, where it's like, you know, the science is clear. Like everyone was so freaked out about the COVID vaccines, where it's like, guys, it's you can get a DNA vaccine now, but like when they put it out as a mRNA vaccine, that was less scary than the DNA vaccine because
Well,
you know
it was a failure to educate.
it really was.
And it's the idea of the vaccine process, right? Like generally, it takes 2 years, But
True.
Trump did a fantastic job with Operation Warp Speed, in which they were able to do all these trials at a much greater speed because the risk of financial failure wasn't there.
Yeah.
The government was essentially backing them and saying, like, look, you can skip ahead. You don't need to do 10,000. Let's do 20. And so they were able to test a vaccine on a grander scale that took them such a shorter period of time, where it would have took years and other processes because they would have had to do it step by step by step by step. Start with a small group, move to a bigger group. Um, and because of Trump and Operation Warp Speed, they were able to move a lot quicker and get to the bigger testing sizes to get those vaccines out.
I just constantly think about, what if this had been as far as COVID goes, it's a little bit stronger than the flu, right? But like I just kept thinking, what if we had like Ebola
I
and
I feel
eh,
like it's some Western bigotry when we talk about COVID that way.
oh yeah,
Look at what happened to Italy. I mean, there were countries that were utterly decimated by COVID. The death toll
oh
was
yeah,
very high, and we got lucky.
I
We got
agree.
lucky.
Yeah, we did. We got lucky. I think we got a lag going on. Oh, never mind. We're good. We're back. Yeah, I mean, we got lucky. We got so lucky with it because, I mean, and I think to myself, I mean, this whole like just anti-intellectual movement. I'm sorry if people don't like this, but I constantly think like Ebola. If we had Ebola, we'd have Marjorie Taylor Greene with her face falling off, shouting like, you know, and we're like, okay, wild. That's wild, and pick whatever leftist you want to fill that argument too, whatever. But you know, uh, the anti-intellectual thing, we got to have more intellectualism, because otherwise we're just miseducating and you know, some people they purposely miseducate so that you know.
Yeah, I'm fairly surprised by that too because that has not been the tradition specifically of the Orthodox Church. Neither,
Agreed.
neither the Catholic Church either. We've had some great teachers of dogmatic theology.
Oh yeah,
Um, and it's sad to see that we're kind of losing that solid grip that we had.
I agree.
Naaman, Hopko, I think Romanov before that. I mean, they were really great teachers.
I mean, we've got people literally just attacking those specific priests you mentioned like all the time now, because they're in some weird mindset. Like, but yeah,
Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of that started with St. Herman's Hermitage.
I think you're
Um,
probably right.
and unfortunately, I don't think the truth has really been told about that particular group. The chaos that was birthed out of that group. They gave us the Holy Order of Man.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know how many people know about what happened with Father Herman. I mean, the guy was a monster. He did horrendous things. He schismed I don't know how many times. It's unfortunate.
and this is one reason why Rose is not considered. He's not going to be probably sainted because of those issues. Honestly, um,
I would hope that we would show some caution in that area, at
yeah,
least until we've had an honest investigation of what was going on there.
I agree.
I don't think it's fair to completely taint Rose with Herman, but you
I
cannot
agree. Yeah,
separate the two either because they were so intertwined. I mean, they were
that's
best
true.
friends. They started the group together. It's hard for me to believe that Herman was able to participate in the sexual abuse and things that were going on and Father Herman have no idea. I mean, Father Seraphim have no idea, but maybe I I don't know.
Yeah, and I'll say, we're being very critical of orthodoxy, obviously, because we're Orthodox. So I think we're allowed to be, and to be completely fair, the majority of Eastern Orthodox, good people, not doing all this nasty stuff. Um, but I don't know if this is where you would want to wrap up or not.
Well, yeah, well, just briefly. I mean, obviously, like these aren't unique issues to religion.
Right.
Sexual abuse happens in school and
Hmm.
things like that. But like you said, I mean, it's because the love we have for the Orthodox Church that we talk about this stuff. It's not because we hate it. Um, Light is best disinfectant for this stuff. Honest conversations. The worst thing you can do is try to cover stuff like this up, because generally the cover up is worse. If the Catholic Church would not have been moving priests around who were abusing children, it wouldn't seem like a giant corrupt organization right now, right?
Right.
I mean, God, like what's worse than priests giving grooming children and giving them crosses so other priests would know that they've been groomed?
Yeah.
And again, it's not only a Catholic issue. This happens in
Southern
school. This happens
Baptist.
in other religions. This
Yeah.
happens in Islam. Um,
Hmm.
P Diddy just fled the country because it happens at Diddy's
Right.
house.
Yeah.
So,
But we got our Kelly, didn't we? Oh man. Um
do we have any questions? Any comments going on in the chat?
so far we just have my friend Daryl. He agreed with you on Ellen G. White, and Juan Monterey has priestly, Yahwehist, and Elohist source. So I'm sure he was referencing when I was talking about the Genesis. So yeah, that's all we've got tonight. But
Okay.
yeah, so I don't know. Do you have any closing words or something that you would want to say?
No, not really. I think I would enjoy coming back and maybe delving into maybe the topic of a creationism a little bit more. That's a pretty big topic.
It is, yeah.
Um, I can we can dive more into like some of the issues that I had with Islam. That could always be fun. I'm sure that's a
Oh
hot
yeah.
button topic. Um, so yeah, I mean we can definitely explore some of this a little bit more.
That
Um,
sounds good.
but yeah, we can leave it here for now.
All right. Yeah. I definitely, yeah, I definitely want to have you back on, obviously. Maybe I'll even have you on some panels if you got the time and want to join them.
Sure.
Um, so
And
yeah, oh, go ahead.
well, and just let me be clear, like I don't want to. I'm not an expert. Um, Check what I say. Take the things I say with a grain of salt. Um, I'm a party clown. Like I said, I do magic. Um, I read a ton, so I'm not completely uninformed, but I make mistakes. So if you catch something, know that it was an honest mistake and that I have conversations in good faith. So,
All right. Well, thank you for coming on, Raphael. So I'm gonna close this off here. Um, I hope you liked this content. That was our interview or chat with Raphael David Beason. And if you liked what you listened to, hit like, subscribe, and see you on the next time that we do this. Thank you and God bless.